This is a very melodic song, so too much distortion was always going to kill this. So we've got this crunch amp here, but we've dialed the gain back quite significantly. And this is just an 8K shelf at 2.2 decibels. So let's hear this off and on. We'll bypass it first, and then I'll bring it in. Ever so slightly lifts the lid on it, brings them brighter, gives them a bit more presence. Not so much in that 2 to 4K sort of painful, dangerous area to boost guitars. So we're getting the same sort of effect from it, but without pushing that nastiness back into it. Want to see how I got the guitar sound to this mix?
But the good, for some odd reason, the good ones are much worse.
This song is Odd Reason from the band Sick Passenger, and if you want to hear that song in full, then the link is in the description. There's a lot of cool guitar stuff going on in this song with tremolo and atmospheric leads, and there's a lot to talk about. So starting with the rhythms here, we've got our track of rhythms, and we've got this rhythm guitar high, but we'll get to that in a second. So this is a stereo file here that was originally 2 mono guitar takes, hard panned left and right. I've just condensed them into one file because it's easier for me to get my head around. So starting with just the clean DI here, I'll go through how I built the tone and got the finished guitar mix. So a cool DI, it's got a little bit of saturation on it straight off the bat. And let's look at the tone here. So I used the Archetype Nolly from Neural DSP. And if you've seen my other videos, you know I use this on 99% of rhythm guitar tracks. This is a very melodic song, so too much distortion was always going to kill this. So we've got this crunch amp here, but we've dialed the gain back quite significantly. You can see I've got the brightness up. The gain's only just above 4, because anything more than that, I lost its definition. And there's some cool sort of chords in here that you really don't want to lose their impact by overly distorting. Whack the bass up full, because that's effectively just a low-pass filter, so we'll do our own low-pass filter later on. Mids I've pushed all the way up here if you look between 7 and 8, because I like to push my mids in the amp sim, and then I'll refine them with some narrow EQ cuts later, so we'll get to that. Bit of treble. This is all left as is. Quick look at the pedals. I chose not to engage the tube screamer. Sometimes I'll have that on but the drive off to clean up the low mids, but with this one it sounded better off. And then the cab section is literally just the 57 in the position that it is when you load it up. And do note here that I haven't used the same cab that comes with this head. I've actually used the 5150 matched cab there. So let's have a listen. So here how the gain's pulled down, it's crunchy, right? But it's not distorted, not by any means. We also do have lead guitars and tremolo guitars going on at this section. So that all adds up to a lot of gain. So you just, in this song in particular, I just didn't need it. Plus, remember, we had some saturation in the DI anyway, which is really nice and feeding into the overall sort of gain aspect of the tone. So from there, we refine it with EQ. Now, this is a little bit more than I would usually do, but they're very narrow, very precise cuts, and we'll go through them. So I've got a very slow gradient here because I still want some of this low end of the guitar. I just don't want it to be as dramatic of a curve. So we're sort of just reducing this section rather than killing it. Then here we are with this low pass up here, bit steeper. We're just cutting out that amp sim fizz. And then we'll go through these little cuts here and explain why I felt they were necessary. So let's hear the whole EQ off and on, and then we'll get into it. Now the difference there should be pretty obvious despite the cuts being quite small. Definitely took some of that low end rumble out because we've got bass, don't forget. I can really fill that area and I would rather hear it on bass than I would in the guitars. So it took some of that weight out, and then you heard there was a horrible whistling frequency, right? That went. I don't think you would notice that was there straight away when you had the amp sim on, but when you bypass and re-engage the EQ, you can really hear. That would be problematic as compression and mastering and all that stuff started to come into play. So let's do these as a whole, because these are all the sort of hissy resonant frequencies that I've just nipped a few of them out, and then we've got a couple here that are dynamic that are set to work a little bit harder in certain chords because it jumped out a little bit more. So we'll highlight all of these and we'll hear this bit off and on. See, it's just hiss and fizz, really. The definition and the character of the tone is still there when they're bypassed. They're very small, and they're just to get more definition, bring the tone into focus, and still retain its character and its bite as much as we can. So next we've got these two mid-range cuts, and if you remember from before, I said I'd push the mids on the amp, and I'm going to refine them with more narrow cuts afterwards. So this is that now. So we've got 700 hertz and 1.2K sort of in that area. Let's hear those one by one. See, they're just sort of like windy, airy whistles. And when you start to refine the mids, you get a lot of that mid-range presence where the guitars are really going to be felt in a mix. And you can take away these windy parts to make it more in focus. Let's turn these off and on so you really get a feel for it. See, hopefully you heard there, the character of the tone stayed the same. We just got rid of a little bit of windy airiness that was blurring our mid-range a little bit. We didn't really lose anything, and we managed to keep that mid-range push, which is why I like to do guitars in this way, rhythm guitars in particular. And then we've got this 200 to 236 here. It's just helping to deal with a little bit of mud as and when needed. As you can see, it's a dynamic one, so it only really works on certain chords and certain muddier points. And just quickly, if you make music like this and you want me to mix your next release, then head over to my website, terrybeckleyrecording.com, send me a message via the contact form, and I will get back to you. So on from there, we go on to Soothe, and this is on the guitar D-Spike preset. And this is set very gentle. This is just taking care of an extra little bit of hiss that I would have heard as I was bringing more and more guitars in. Obviously, those frequencies start to build up, so I'm only taking care of them. So you probably won't hear much if I bypass this Soothe. Yeah, the tiniest, most subtle hiss just being taken out there. But it's more about how all the guitars add up, which is why that's important. And then we've got another EQ, which will probably be, just one extra little resonant frequency as I brought the bass and things in. So I just need to take care of that there. Typical problem area, around 2K for guitars. And now, as we've taken away a little bit of that grit, a little bit of that bite from the 2 to 4K region, we want to bring some brightness back in the guitars and, get them to sort of like make your eyes widen when you hear it. That's how I always think about it. So I always use this ancient SSL channel plugin from Waves, but I know what 8K sounds like on this plugin, so I go for this plugin every time. And this is just an 8K shelf at 2.2 decibels. Nothing else is being touched apart from I like to add this little safety filter here, just 90 hertz, and then 14K low pass filter. But they're just sort of safety bits. I know we've done it in the Pro Q3. There's a slightest change to the slopes when I put this on that I can hear, maybe because I've used this plugin for years. Without it, I'm pretty sure it'll be fine. So let's hear this off and on. We'll bypass it first, and then I'll bring it in. Ever so slightly lifts the lid on it, gets a little crispier up there in the top end, but I'm fine with that. Brings them brighter, gives them a bit more presence. Not so much in that 2 to 4K sort of painful, dangerous area to boost guitars. So we're getting the same sort of effect from it, but without pushing that nastiness back into it. This is a melodic sort of pop punk emo kind of song. We're not chugging away here. And then a little bit of compression, the tiniest amount of compression from the CLA 3A. ever so slightly pushing those guitars forward. It's more of a vibe thing than it is anything else. And then lastly, we've got a little bit of saturation with Decapitator. I do this in different ways. Sometimes I like to use like a 1073 preamp on the DI, something like that, just to give it a bit of like an analog feel, like it's been mixed with hardware. It's very subtle. Let's have a listen to this. Yeah, that is really nice saturation. It's not really distortion, it's just really saturating it. Makes it a bit thicker, stops it from being too harsh, grits it up a little bit. I really like that. Okay, so now I've got this R guitar high, which is higher up the neck on the guitar, sort of like a lead part, but I felt like it was supposed to blend in with the rhythm guitars rather than be a standout lead, because we've got lead guitars happening in this section as well. So we will have sucked the low end out of this to make sure that it blends in with the more sort of full toned rhythms. So everything off. The first thing I've done here is I put it through this Tone Forge plugin, which is quite a cool plugin when you just need a different vibe out of a guitar. Sometimes I use it to fix problems, but these tracks were so well recorded that I didn't need to do that. I just wanted a slightly different sound so that I got a little bit of separation between the two parts. So I would have recorded the DI into this with this capture source bit here, and then, you know, it's the same as a impulse response. The plugin comes with all these impulse responses you can use. So I've got this Midwest emo here, which I love for sort of higher up the neck stuff. And I probably would have chucked this on having built a tone and thought, no, I could do something a bit more interesting with this. So let me show you what I'm doing with this plugin. I'm just changing the sound of the DI. It's probably going to be louder. So let me try and whack this level matching up here so we can compare accurately. Yeah, I just like how that changed the vibe of the tone. Doesn't really make much sense as a decision just yet, but as we run it into our amp sim, it just felt better for the lead that we were doing. So what I've done here is I've actually turned off the cab section of Archetype Nolly, and I've added a different cab sim from here, from the GGD Studio Cabs. It's the oversized Cali plugin. And I've used an upfront cab with an SM57, and then I've got this 421 here blended in and darkened in parallel. So I have to leave that cab section on so we can hear the actual tone. Got the overdrive pedal on here, so a bit more gain on this part. Yeah, so the same head as the rhythm guitars, and that's why I wanted to change it up with a different vibe on the DI and a different cab to give it a bit of saturation from those main rhythms. So let's hear this now. Yeah, got some work to do with EQ on this tone, which is what I can see is coming next. So similar to the rhythms with the filters, the high and low pass filters, then we've got some mid problems to take care of here, which is why we've got quite a thick dynamic one at the 400 and 600 hertz, and a lot more going on with these sort of harsh frequencies. Similar sort of area. Let's hear this EQ now. Yeah, really thinning that out. If we hear it now in context with the rhythms, you'll see as we're trying to sort of carve it into a space so it joins in with the main rhythm. Yeah, so now you wouldn't necessarily know it was two separate parts. Okay, into Soothe, working a lot harder this time. We've got the harshness here, and then we've got sort of that low end that you could probably hear that distorting when it's played by itself in not a very pleasant way. So that's why we've got that to try and help with that issue. Yeah, it's starting to sound nicer with that on there. And now back to some EQ. So slightly different to what we had before, because it's it's a completely different part sonically. High pass all the way up to 250, but then we're actually still using a shelf, but it's down as far as sort of 2.5K here. And then we've pushed the mids also to try and give it some more identity within this like guitar mix that we're creating now. Let's hear this. Yeah, really bringing that top end out now, which is where the sort of character of that part is coming from. Into some compression, same as before. And now some saturation, but instead of using the decapitator, it's already quite distorted, this part. Gone for a warm tube on the Saturn II. Yeah, thickening up the sort of higher up mid range that we've got in this part. And now, as it's a bit more lead-y, I like to use limiters on those. I've gone for the finality here, so let's have a listen to that. And let's bring in the other rhythms too, as I like to cheat with these limiters and use them as volume knobs because I'm lazy. Yeah, so I think that gets them to gel as one part effectively, but there's still separation in there from using a different cab and stuff. I think it's cool. And as you can see, the low gain tone was so important because now that gain is really starting to stack up, right? Okay, so moving on from rhythms, we've got these really cool tremolo guitars, and this is a theme throughout the song. And I think it really gives the song its character. And it was expressed to me that the tremolo was a really important part. So let's look at how that was created. There's two playing off each other again, which is sort of similar to what we just had. So you've got one that's more like a leady sort of part, and then you've got one just reinforcing with ring outs. So let's hear this more lead focused tremolo part. Yeah, this is really cool, and I really enjoyed working on this part especially. So we have got an ambient sounding tone. I went with the ambient breakup preset and would have tweaked from there. So we've got the compressor engaged to snappy, that's helping the transients come out. Then we've got the tube screamer engaged this time, drive off tone just to keep it a bit brighter. And then we've got a little bit of overdrive, tiny bit of overdrive from this pedal here into the amp head. So I've gone with the same cab this time, as in the matched cab to the head of the plugin. So now we've got 3 different cabs working for all these guitars, and that was one way of keeping them, making sure they were all heard within the mix, was to have different cabs, so effectively different EQ responses on each one. Tiny bit more gain, haven't gone for the brightness on this one. Actually used the bass knob as a high pass filter in this case, bit of mids for definition, same sort of treble for the brightness. These dials here would have been from the ambient breakup preset anyway. And microphone wise, got the 57, and you've also got the 414, which I believe is the AKG C414. And that's really nice for brighter stuff. I always found that when actually using one in real life as well. And then we've got some delay happening here. The reverb's not engaged, but it's that quarter note, which is interesting because we're going to add the tremolo in, and we've also got an auto pan happening later too, which is actually a bit of spice I wanted to throw in there. Built into some EQ like before, so we won't go through. It's very similar thought process behind it. We've rolled off the low end a little harder than in the amp. We haven't rolled off the top end completely. We've just used a shelf to control how bright and harsh it is. And then similar sort of cuts. I'll quickly give you an A/B of that EQ. See, without pulling out that extra bit of low end, the tremolo can be a bit problematic. Is that with that low end sort of pumping with the tremolo, not so much a pump, but it really feels less of a smooth tremolo. So that's why this would have been dragged further and further along as the tremolo effect went on. Okay, into some saturation. Like I said, I do it in different ways. This is the non-linear summer from Waves. This is a really good one for guitars. And I've got the spike on here. Into soothe, just dealing with the harshness. Seems like we had a problem frequency there. And then into limiter, as I wanted to make sure that this tremolo was going to be even. So I didn't want any peaks or notes to be louder or jumping out harder than others. And then into this SSL EQ. So we're pushing the 8K shelf as usual. Got the filters as usual. We're also pushing a little bit of just under 3K. We've done a lot of work to control or bring those frequencies down in the other guitars. So there's room here, a little bit of room for this tremolo. And as it's only going to be momentary, this tremolo guitar, it felt okay to give it some of that 2 to 3K space. And then pulled out some of the mids, because we've got a lot of mids in the other guitars, and some more controlling of that muddy sort of lower mid range. So let's hear this EQ off and on. Yeah, I really like what that's doing actually. It's cleaning up the low end. It is focusing it more onto sort of the 2-3 region, giving it a bit of brightness. It works well with that tremolo. And then this is a multi-band. This is to ensure that it didn't move too much as with different chords and etc. I wouldn't always use this on guitars. Sometimes it's cool. But this part was very rhythmic and I wanted to keep it where it was. So a little bit extra from the linear multi-band. Okay, now let's get that tremolo effect. So we're using the tremolator from Sound Toys. This is I just think it sounds great for tremolo. It has a little bit of character to it too. And you have to forgive me, I don't really understand what these different shapes are. I just cycle through them until I found one that made some kind of sense with the rhythm of the song and the part. So we've got going on an 8th note here. I kept the accent down the middle because I want it to be quite straight. But then you see this feel here. I remember playing with this quite a lot because whether I wanted it to feel lazy and sort of behind the beat or up front and it's just ahead of it. And that's why I pushed it towards this drag here. I think it felt better just being a little bit lazier, I guess, with the tempo of the song, as it's quite a relaxed, it's not like a fast in your face sort of sound. I'll play around with these so you get a feel with how this was designed, and I'll turn off the pan man because that's what's coming next so that we don't have it going left and right. You can see there when I bypassed it because the picking is already kind of rhythmic anyway. So to have this work well with it was a bit of a challenge. So we'll move these controls around and you can sort of see what they do. Starting with the feel. See how it kind of feels like it's in a rush now? That's why this was really important to get it in with the feel of the song. I guess that's why it's called the feel knob. And then depth would have been the next important one where you didn't want it to sound too choppy. See, the more depth you add, the more obviously tremoloed it sounds, which could be cool, but it can get a bit fatiguing. So I felt like, again, to fit with the feel of the song, it needed to be brought back slightly. Yeah, really cool plugin for creating these kind of tremolo effects. And then I wanted to add a little bit more to it. I felt like when the whole mix was in, the tremolo was there, but it wasn't that obvious, probably because I didn't have the depth up max and I didn't want it to be too fatiguing throughout the whole song. So this pan man just shifts, it works with the tremolo to sort of shift it from the left to the right speaker just to give it a bit more of make it a bit more noticeable and still keep the same vibe that I wanted. And I was pretty pleased with myself with this one. So I'll start with it off and I'll turn it on. Yeah, I really thought that was a cool little extra sort of 10% to that tremolo effect. And then you don't have to worry too much about this track spacer here. That's just dealing with when the synth comes in, which we'll get to later on in this video series. It was a challenge to get all of these, because there's a lot of tracks in this song, to get them all to fit. So when the synth comes in, I felt like it had to take a little bit of precedence over the tremolo, hence the track spacer. And then we've also got this send out to a guitar room to give it a bit more depth. Like I said at the beginning, it's a very atmospheric song. But this is pretty cool in itself. The Valhalla Supermassive, which is free, and then another Valhalla plugin. Shout out to Valhalla. I had to pay for all these in full, by the way. Well, the other one's free, but I had to pay for this one. Just set to the large room here. So let's show you what this is adding. So much to the sound, right? And the drums are pretty atmospheric too, which is why the guitars needed to be. So this is the Gemini. I'm pretty sure I would have left this on its default setting on the Gemini mode because I don't really understand. You start to mess with this plugin, it gets pretty crazy. And then, yeah, we've just got the room. Obviously, it's a bus, so it's 100%, and that's the large room default setting. I load this plugin up, and I'll always go with the default setting unless I'm not like, yeah, that's it. Most of the time, though, that room, this large room on default is exactly what you want to hear. Okay, Tremolo 2. These are mostly ring outs. So you can hear a slightly different feel to the tremolo there, right? And I first off tried them to have the same tremolo and panning effects, but didn't work. You can sort of see now why the band had 2 tremolo parts, because you could just had the one. I'm sure they wanted a bit more of an interesting feel to this. So this is the archetype Corey Wong, which is, if I can't get what I want from the archetype Nolly, and more distortion isn't the way to go, so I wouldn't use the 14 Cali from Neural, then my next port of call is the Corey Wong. So Tube Screamer using a very similar way, drive is off, tones up, and then you've got this compressor here. And other than that, this looks pretty similar to the default settings. Bass is pulled down and mids are pulled down because this is a very mid-rangey sounding plugin. And also it's mid-rangey because of the default mics are usually ribbon mics and stuff rather than the 57. So there's a 120 Royal 121 blended with the C414. So similar, same mic that we had in the other one. And then interesting EQ, but like I said, it's very mid-rangey without this, the Corey Wong, which is cool, but this is a more of an effecty part, so we didn't want it to be too mid-rangey in that respect. Bit of EQ, again, brightening up with the 8K shelf, pushing it in a different place to the other one where we pushed it around sort of 2.5. This is now 3.5 to 4. Same sort of thought process though. There's room for that. And then we pushed this one. This was obviously not so lead driven, so we've pushed the sort of 1K mid range here, and again pulled back some mud. And then now I want to get into this tremolator to see why it's different. Same shape, but we've got a quarter note instead of an eighth there. More on the drag, and the depth is harder too, only slightly. So let's hear the two of them together. Yeah, so you can get where I was going with that. When they had the same tremolo, the ring outs kind of just blended into the other one. Pan Man again to add that extra 10%. Soothe. Pan Man does add a little bit of hiss sometimes, so Soothe here to tame the cab. It's a tame the cab preset that I would have started with there. And then some extra brightness using the Airband. This plugin is amazing for brightness without harshness most of the time. So that's why we've pushed that Airband up there. So lastly, for these guitars in this chorus, we've got these leads here. Let's hear those. Now, guitar parts like that, lead parts, can be very tricky when you've got the single string stuff and then you can hear it sort of more as more strings get hit in the part or played in the part. It can be very difficult to get a consistent tone that doesn't get really harsh or lose its drive at different points. So this was difficult too, but let's see what we did. Big way to overcome that is a limiter, which is on the DI itself. And then this time we've used the Oracle from ML Sound Labs. I've got a whole video on this. I'll link that to the description on how I use this plugin for rhythms. And yeah, we've got the drive pedal trying to emulate this sort of tube screamer from the Neural with the drive down, the tone up. And then we're using the cab, which sometimes I'll switch the cab off and use the oversized Cali, but in this instance, we're using a mix between the ribbon and the 57 on this cab here. And then EQ is a lead part, so we don't have to make as many notches. I feel like you don't always need to. You just need to deal with the spiky issues that can build up. So we've got a cut at 2 and a cut just above 3, and then using a shelf to thin it out just a tad. So I'll engage the plugins we've been through so far, and I want to show this EQ off and on because it should be subtle, but again, just deal with what it needs to deal with. Yeah, subtle. The dynamic shelf here helps that pick attack because that was sort of making those lower frequencies jump out a little bit. And then into some saturation here with, this is a very smooth sounding saturation, this Neve setting on the NLS channel. Let's hear that. Yeah, smooths it out. Obvious volume jump there, but it's all part of the level I was getting. But hopefully you heard the saturation part as well as the volume jump in that. Now some EQ. And this is where it gets important with leads because you want them to be heard through the rhythms, but you don't want to push them and make them too thin and harsh. So this mid-range boost that you'll see here is super important. I've also got a video on how I mix leads sort of like the double octaves that you'll hear a lot in pop punk, and I'll put that in the description too. And this is a very similar sort of thought process behind that, is to get them heard and to make them balanced and not so harsh. You find an area where they really pop through the guitars, the rhythm guitars. So we've got sort of 1.6 kilohertz here. We've got a almost 2 decibel boost. Get a boost at sort of 2K. That will also get them through the rhythms because we've pulled that back a little bit, brighten them up with the 8K shelf that I love to do, and then rolled off up to 120. So let's hear this off, and I'll show you what it's adding. Yeah, and that obvious volume jump is a lot to do with the mids, and that will push those through the rhythm guitars. In fact, if I put the rhythm guitars on, and we'll bring this EQ in so you can see how it really gets them to be heard through all of the rhythms. So I'll bypass that EQ with the rhythms in there. Yeah, it really brings them forward. When you've got the whole mix going, they can get a little bit lost and only the thin harshness can come through. So that's why that mid push is really important. Soothe to deal with the harshness, softer guitar cab preset this time. And then this to use the air band on this plugin again, which I love doing. This time set to 20 instead of 40 on that air band there. Cool, and then we've got a couple of effects happening. We've got a guitar doubler, which is using the micro shift from Sound Toys again. And that's sort of creating that chorusy doubling effect you can hear. Yeah, see, it spreads it out, makes it a bit more interesting. It's not so just like awkwardly dry down the middle without that. And then the second send is the CLA guitar plugin. We've got the treble and compression turned off. That's where we're getting the reverb from, is a bit of that club setting here, bit of delay and a bit of this pitch here is like a spreading, like a spreader. Oh, it's actually set to spreader. Yeah. So without that, it would sound like this. It's just bringing a bit of reverb in there. Everything else has a little bit of reverb on it too, which is what makes this song, what gives this song its atmospheric character. Okay, so that's pretty much most of the guitars. We've got this lower down lead parts here, but it's using pretty much the same stuff. Let me quickly play what this is here. Yeah, slightly lower down sort of texture part there. So these are all using the same stuff. They will have all been copied over from the last one, I would imagine. Yep, pretty much. The only thing that looks different here is we've got dealing with a bit of extra harshness again as the guitars start to build up. I do want to add how good the production is on this, because what gives it its bigness is we've got this big intro here with all these ring outs, which I'll play you in a second, where you've got the rhythms, you've got the higher one doing it too, but you've also got some extra ring out parts. So it's really been thought about. You've got this, what I've called guitar play here, which sort of just plays into the chorus. So they've really thought about how to add extra texture, extra size, and extra little bits of ear candy and stuff as the song goes on, which is a really important thing to do. And it really helps people mix their song. And this was an absolute pleasure to mix, I might add. So I just wanted to show you the intro and how big this song is. When we spoke about the room tone in the guitars, we had that room track, we had a bit of reverb in the leads and stuff. Atmosphere in the drums too, which we'll get to in the other videos in this video series. But just listen to how the extra production in terms of like extra like ring outs and stuff, the using the room tone for a song like this, that's how we're able to get this kind of sound. Yeah, really cool. So if you want to check that song out, it's called Odd Reason by Sick Passenger. The link will be in the description. If you want to see how we did the other elements to this song, like drums, bass, vocals, and then all of the post-production stuff like this, the synth and the strings, then make sure to check those videos out. I'll be getting through them one by one. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.